Hi YouTube, Darth here. This is Battle Plan, a video series where I talk about all the big picture strategies you can use to help you achieve victory on Battlefield maps. Today's target is Hainan Resort, another of the vanilla maps for Battlefield 4. Along with Dawnbreaker, I think this is one of the more frustrating maps to play on if your teamwork isn't up to snuff in the areas of the map I'll talk about. In this video I'll be going over all the strategies, tricks, and tips that you can use to help your team along to victory on Hainan Resort. Hainan Resort has a typical layout for a medium-sized Battlefield Conquest map with 5 flags on Conquest Large: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. One of the unique features about this map is that most of the action is drawn to Charlie, while the map is also a hybrid between water and land action. Though 95% of the action on Hainan Resort will happen on the land, and this is really what matters when it comes to victory. On Conquest Small, Hainan Resort shrinks to 3 flags with just Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. The strategies remain similar, but there is increased emphasis on capturing the hotel flag at Bravo. For Conquest Large, something I want to draw attention to is the disparity between the Chinese team and the US team. This map is actually pretty skewed towards the US team if you look at the average distance between the flags. There's about 1/3 less distance between the US gimme points and the center at Charlie, and this translates to a pretty big advantage in travel time over open terrain. To offset this, the Chinese team is positioned closer to their gimme flags at Delta and Echo. This gives the Chinese the opportunity to take those flags back sooner, although there is a giant body of water between their spawn and one of their gimmies, which complicates things pretty drastically. There are a lot of other factors that skew this map towards the US team, but I'll get to those later. Just know that you're going to have to fight an uphill battle as the Chinese. The general strategy for Hainan Resort is going to be focusing on keeping your team's gimme points under control and capturing Charlie. A strong triangle will give you that 3-2 capture advantage and won't overextend your team. So let's look at the map's center point at Charlie. This point is a veritable fortress when defended properly, and there's almost always continuous action from one team or the other pushing it. Of course, it's also the map's big Levolution event. If either team takes out the walls of the structures on either side of the lobby, that structure on that end of the building will collapse. The effect on gameplay is that it actually makes it a bit easier for that side to capture the hotel. This is because it removes the covered vantage points for second story and top floor snipers, and provides a tunneled approach into the lobby that isn't easily traversed by defenders exiting. Now let's look at one pretty typical situation on the map. The US team is in control of Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. If the Chinese team takes a pretty typical approach of trying to go directly from Delta or Echo to Charlie, they're going to find a lot of defenders waiting and ready to spray them down. It's a tragedy I see repeated pretty often on this map. It gets even worse if the US team has taken Echo, as now there is pretty much a single lane of traffic that gets obliterated the moment it leaves Delta. So let's back up and take a look at how the Chinese team can force an opening here. The easier route might be to take a rib to Alpha, preferably with backup from the attack boat. Alpha is generally lightly defended, but if you drive too close to the shore, anybody along the beach or defenders blocking the land route to Alpha are going to see you and either take you out or call you out. Capturing Alpha opens up some possibilities for the Chinese team. If the US team is particularly focused up on Charlie, taking Bravo should be as simple as removing 2 or 3 responding defenders and watching out for armor from the American spawn. A lot of US traffic to reinforce Bravo will travel along a single lane, so if you have a spare moment, mining that road can earn you some very easy LAV and vehicle kills. Forecapping the US team then leaves them at a serious disadvantage in the burn, splits up their forces, and is usually enough to make capturing Charlie a real possibility. Even if the US team has managed to capture Echo or Delta in the process, you've still got a really annoying thorn in their side and a much easier approach to Charlie. Let's look at the flip side of that situation for the American team. If the Chinese team is in control of the majority of the map, you've got a much easier time of assaulting Charlie, as there is a lot less open ground to cover. One trick I mentioned earlier that can make taking Charlie that much easier is to bring down the US side of the hotel. This should make it easier to slip in and avoid spots and campers, especially on the back side of the building. Failing that, capturing Delta is actually a very powerful move for the US team, especially because it's quite a bit further from the Chinese team than most gimmies on the map, and it's easy to access from the ocean. I'll get into some more specifics later, but having this point on the US side is a huge problem for the Chinese team. It breaks up the easiest Chinese route to Charlie, and it's difficult to eject a US team that defends it in force. Conversely, if you're on the Chinese team, you cannot let the US team get Delta. So that's pretty much the lay of the land for Hainan Resort. The US team has a pretty strong advantage, and with a little pressure, it's simply a matter of choking off the Chinese team wherever they crop up. The Chinese team, on the other hand, has to play this map strategically and backcap the US team if they want to get a win. Each individual capture point has some characteristics about it that if you prepare yourself for, you can have a much easier time of capturing that point. First, it's important to know where the spawn points are on this map, as you'll not only have to deal with the possibility that enemies could be coming from literally everywhere, you'll need to know what the most frequent routes are for defenders. For every point, the spawns are on the outskirts of the point facing in. Some of the most predictable spawns come from Alpha, Bravo, and Echo. Generally, these 3 points come in from the outside of the map. At Alpha, if you're capturing this point as the Chinese, the US team is going to reinforce it from the hills, the sea, and with armor from the spawn. It certainly helps to have a teammate here to capture this point as quickly as possible. This will keep the spawning defenders from blocking the capture. Keep in mind that if the buildings are still up at this point, that any defenders coming from the hills can see you inside them if you aren't careful about your cover. Those big open windows are a death trap. I usually see a lot of soldiers capturing Alpha on the side of the building next to the sea by the metal crates. It's a good spot for head glitching, but most players use it terribly and don't pay much attention. It's also easy to clear with a grenade. At Bravo, if the structure isn't collapsed, it can make a much better point to take the flag from, as it provides a good view of any foot traffic from both Alpha and Charlie. But you have to keep an eye out as there are several ways into the building. The most common spawning defenders come from the car park behind the building, and keeping an eye on this is critical if you want to capture this point. Capturing Bravo seems to fly under the radar of US defenders from other parts of the map, so if there are responders from Charlie or Alpha, unless they are armored, you'll usually have plenty of warning as the lines of sight around Bravo are pretty open. Swapping to the Chinese side of the map, the Echo point is a pretty easy point to capture if the walls of the houses are still intact. So as a point of advice to the Chinese team, if you can spare a moment to take these out, it helps immensely for responding defenders if the US team can't use the easy cover here. Standing under the houses is a risky play, as while it's obscured, there's no cover to protect you from anyone who does see you. Mining the sea lanes here is also a really good play, as soldiers will often just grab the rib here and drive forward without spotting for mines. In general, mining with slams is a very good play on Hainan at any of the choke points on the water lanes, especially under bridges. It's unlikely that even a careful player spotting them or wary of them will catch them in time. Delta, as I mentioned earlier, is critical for the Chinese to defend. However, there's a very simple way to undermine this point, and that's to place a radio beacon on top of the wreckage that makes up the point, preferably in one of the spots covered from fire from the ocean. The only way the Chinese team can remove it is if they are airborne or with an MAV. In either case, there's no way up there if you're a defender spawning at the point. The US team can't capture Delta from up there, but it is an easy access point. As for actually capturing Delta, the capture area is actually quite large and extends towards the Chinese side of the map. You can try hiding in the holes inside the ship, but most defenders will come looking for you, and it obscures your vision pretty terribly. Generally, I like to keep a patrol around the containers and the front of the ship to intercept any responders. There is one other way to capture the point, and that's from the seaside. You can actually get in behind the ship and start taking the point that way. With a rib boat back there, it becomes very hard to eject you and your squad. It's especially effective because there is really only one spot that you can walk in from, and everywhere else will cause infantry to swim. The only thing that can really spoil your party back here is clever infantry or a boat showing up. And finally, there is of course Charlie. There are a lot of different ways to come at this point, and generally defenders spawn all around it from as far south as the pool to the north side near the canal. The Chinese team is going to have the hardest time assaulting this point, but I've found that coming up from behind is generally a better tactic than trying to run directly from Delta to Charlie. Again, if the defenders are giving you trouble, consider bringing down your side of the building. Never bring down the opposing player's side if it can be avoided. Once you're inside the building, things become a bit simpler. I tend to prefer the second level of the building, as it gives you the ability to capture the point and the height advantage over any defenders below. That second level also has a great route to run and flank on the back entrance to any of the other parts of the building. The biggest problem you're going to face when assaulting Charlie is where enemies are coming from, so this is a good opportunity to use the tugs or call in a commander UAV. Keep in mind that commanders will often place their UAV here because it is also the point that gives them the cruise missile ability. If I had to recommend a class to play on Hainan Resort, it would go in this order: Engineer, Assault, Recon, and finally Support. There's just enough open areas and vehicle action on this map that if you get caught as infantry by a vehicle, you're going to need all that added firepower of the Engineer. Unless you're driving a vehicle, you're going to want to throw some slams in your backpack and drop them in the waterways and roadways whenever you get the chance. There's a lot of confined vehicle traffic on this map between the points, and it makes sense to take advantage of those channels. As for choice of primary weapon, I'd definitely pick up a mid to long range carbine like the M4 or AK-5C. I'd probably stick to higher DPS weapons in case you intend to spend a lot of time at Charlie, where CQB can come in handier. If I were focusing exclusively on Charlie, I'd probably play Assault, as Charlie does tend to be the infantry action focus of the map. But you're out of luck if a vehicle shows up. Like the Engineer, mid to long range weapons are going to be your friend on Hainan Resort. I'd probably stick with the M416, Scar H, or M16A4, but picking up a carbine like the AK-5C or Ace-52 is also an option on this map, particularly because they have hipfire benefits that could assist in close quarters. Next, playing Recon, you want to avoid the huge noob temptation that is the roof at Charlie. Yes, you can lock this down with C4 and a bolt-action rifle, get a million KD, and be a general nuisance. But it might surprise you to learn that there are no flags on top of that roof and you're essentially irrelevant to the outcome of the game if you go up there. Rather than being useless, an aggressive recon with a carbine, tugs, and a radio beacon can really make for some trouble for enemy teams. Get that beacon into hard to find locations and you can keep cropping up time and again on the enemy team like a terrible disease. Putting a tugs at Charlie essentially makes it unassailable by the enemy team. Packing in a little C4 will also give you a chance against vehicles, especially because they tend to get locked up on this map into small lanes and clutter. Finally, I put support at the bottom of this list because they really don't have a lot to offer the team on Hainan Resort. The huge ammo reserves of the LMGs don't usually come into play outside of Charlie or even at Charlie, as there is plenty of cover and not a lot of opportunities for huge flanks like on lockers or other tight infantry maps. As a support, you don't have the vehicle killing power of the engineers, the visibility aids of the recon, or the healing ability of the assault. But if you're determined to play support, I'd recommend bringing a UCAV as the map is very open, or possibly some C4. Again, I'd probably only recommend playing support if you have a very solid squad that needs a lot of ammo. Finally, I want to talk about vehicles on Hainan Resort. I've had some amazing games in attack jets, stealth jets, boats, and the LAV. A lot of times though, it really doesn't matter how good your vehicles are if the infantry on the ground can't grab those capture points. I've aced the skies going 40-0 and my team has still lost. I've fought against teams with ridiculous vehicle pilots and tankers, and it's not mattered because this map is fundamentally about boots on the ground. Vehicle warfare is really just a multiplying factor. Why is that? It's because Hainan Resort does a good job of compartmentalizing the vehicles. There isn't a lot of cover for air, land, or sea vehicles. Land vehicles very easily get confined to pathways and stuck on or near clutter. The water is pretty open on Hainan, so the boats can be targeted by just about everything. And the jets are countered by the MAA and shoulder-launched missiles, so they can be dealt with while the infantry advances. That's not to say they can't play a big role in the outcome of the map. A team with garbage vehicles and mediocre infantry pushes is going to lose every time. But a team with godly vehicles and mediocre infantry pushes is probably still going to lose because vehicles have a hard time safely capturing points on this map. But whatever loadout you're using, I'd recommend carefully considering where you're going to attack during any given life. You may need to switch up what class, weapon, and gadgets you're using accordingly. Overall, Hainan Resort is a very difficult map to make progress on if your team is behind, but with some strategic thinking you can make some very rewarding turnarounds. If you can get that turnaround or keep the pressure up on the enemy team, that's the game. Or at least, that's the plan. That's it for this episode of Battle Plan. If you liked this episode, please leave a like before you go. If you're new around here, check out my channel and please consider subscribing. If you've got a map and a game mode you'd like to see me discuss in a future episode, please leave a comment below. Even hardline maps and game modes are up for grabs. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.